feel no type of way. You can't make me feel some type of way mentioning my son. That don't, I already come to grips with what happened, bro. That don't,
Mm.
you think you going.
The situation between Gillie The Kid and NBA YoungBoy has reached a level that has the whole hip-hop world watching closely. This is not just another disagreement, not just another exchange of words between artists. This is the type of moment where one statement can change the entire conversation and leave people looking at the situation from a completely different angle. There is a long history and a lot of background that many people may not know about. Somewhere along the way, the energy between these two names shifted, and something was said that touched on a deeply personal subject. The reaction that followed became one of the biggest talking points in hip-hop, especially because Gillie The Kid's response showed how seriously he viewed the situation. We are breaking down the full story, including who these two figures are, what history connects them, what led to the tension, and how Gillie responded when everything started gaining attention. The biggest part of this entire situation might not just be what was said, but also what was left unsaid. Before getting into the details, it is important to understand exactly who these two men are, because the background matters whenever a major conversation like this takes over the culture. Gillie The Kid, born Nasir Farr, is a well-known name from North Philadelphia who has built a respected place in hip-hop over many years. Before becoming one of the voices behind one of the culture's biggest podcasts, Gillie was putting in work as a rapper and as a member of the respected Philly group Major Figures. He built his name through years of dedication, representing a city known for producing legendary talent and for expecting artists to bring real personality and authenticity. Philadelphia has given hip-hop some unforgettable names, from Will Smith to Meek Mill, and Gillie became another recognizable figure connected to that tradition. His career was not only about music. He used his experience, personality, and knowledge of the culture to create something that reached audiences far beyond traditional rap. Alongside his cousin Wallace Peoples, known to many as Wallo267, Gillie helped create $1 million worth of game. The podcast, distributed through Barstool Sports, became one of the most talked about shows in the space, attracting huge audiences and often pulling in over 1 million views per episode. The reason the show connected with so many people was because it mixed music conversations, life lessons, humor, relationships, and real advice in a way that felt natural. It was not just interviews, it was a place where guests could speak openly and share different perspectives. Big names such as Shaquille O'Neal, Michael B. Jordan, Kevin Hart, LL Cool J, and Alicia Keys have appeared on the platform because Gillie and Wallo built a space focused on honesty and conversation. Their message was represented by the word game, meaning guidance, attention, motivation, and education, which reflected the purpose behind the show. That background is important because Gillie is not viewed only as a rapper. He has become a major voice in entertainment, someone whose opinions can create discussions across the culture. So when a situation involving him and another major artist starts making noise, people naturally want to understand the full story before judging what happened. Gillie The Kid became something much bigger than just a rapper. Over time, he turned into a voice for the culture, a person people look to for perspective, and a true Philadelphia figure who represented where he came from. His influence stretched beyond music because people respected his experiences, his conversations, and the way he carried himself. NBA YoungBoy, born Kentrell Deshaun Gaulden in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, built a completely different type of legacy. His story came from struggle, loss, and survival. He faced difficult moments early in life, including losing people close to him, spending time in juvenile detention, and dealing with legal issues while continuing to release music at an incredible pace. What made YoungBoy stand out was not only how much music he created, even though the numbers were massive. His connection with fans came from the emotion behind his songs. His voice carried pain, honesty, and the feeling of someone putting his personal experiences directly into his records. With billions of views and streams across platforms, YoungBoy became one of the most listened to artists of his generation, but the numbers were only part of the story. His supporters connected with the emotion, the struggles, and the vulnerability that came through in his music. His fan base became known as one of the strongest in rap because they stayed locked in through every chapter, whether it was legal situations, time away from the public, personal drama, or moments that sparked conversations online. YoungBoy continued creating music, and his audience continued supporting him. By the summer of 2026, anticipation was building around his expected return from custody. Many fans were watching closely, wondering what his next move would be and how he would step back into the spotlight. Instead of keeping everything quiet during that period, YoungBoy expressed himself the way he always has, through music, where he has often shared his thoughts and emotions. Now, this is where the timeline becomes important. Before the events of July 2026, there was no widely known public issue between Gillie The Kid and NBA YoungBoy. There was no major history of public back and forth or ongoing conflict between the two names. Actually, one of their most recognized moments together showed a completely different side. In December 2023, Gilly and Wallow traveled to Wyoming to visit YoungBoy at the location where he had been staying during his house arrest while facing federal gun-related charges. The episode of $1 Million Worth of Game, released on Christmas Day as episode 252, gave fans a rare look at a side of YoungBoy they did not usually see. The conversation was personal and open. YoungBoy spoke about what it felt like being isolated for an extended period, how he handled being away from normal life, and the things that motivated him personally and creatively. Gilly and Wallow brought the same approach they bring to many of their interviews: honest questions, respect, and a willingness to let guests speak freely. For many viewers, the episode felt different because it showed YoungBoy outside of headlines and internet discussions. Instead of only seeing the controversy surrounding him, fans got a closer look at the person behind the music. That conversation changed how some people viewed him. It gave audiences a more personal perspective and showed a connection between Gilly, Wallow, and YoungBoy that seemed based on understanding rather than conflict. The interaction between Gilly, Wallow, and NBA YoungBoy was surprisingly positive, respectful, and personal. Instead of a tense conversation, viewers saw two sides connecting through real experiences and honest discussion. But shortly after the episode released, a new layer of controversy started to develop. An associate of YoungBoy named Herm the Black Sheep went on Instagram and suggested that the interview was not something YoungBoy had fully approved for release himself. Herm claimed that the only interview YoungBoy had officially signed off on was a separate conversation with Bootleg Kev. Then came a comment that caught people's attention. Herm made a statement that many interpreted as a direct message toward Gilly, suggesting that some people bring a certain tough image around YoungBoy, but do not show that same energy toward the people connected to personal losses in their own lives. That statement hit differently because, at the time, Gilly was dealing with the loss of his son, Cheese, due to gun violence. Many people viewed Herm's words as a serious accusation, almost suggesting that Gilly's approach toward YoungBoy was different from how he handled the pain surrounding his own family situation. The comment created tension between the two sides. Some fans saw it as unnecessary drama coming from people around the artist. Others believed it revealed deeper issues that had been building behind the scenes. Either way, the moment stayed in people's minds. What many did not expect was that NBA YoungBoy would eventually touch on a similar subject himself through music. Looking back, that 2023 Instagram post feels like an early sign of the disagreement that would later become a much bigger conversation. But to understand why everything exploded, you have to look at what was happening with YoungBoy before the situation with Gilly became public. During that period, YoungBoy appeared to enter a more aggressive creative phase, addressing different people through his music and public statements. The first major moment came when YoungBoy went after Future, around the same time the Atlanta artist released his album, The Real Me. What started online quickly grew into a larger exchange, bringing reactions, responses, and more attention from fans across the culture. Soon after, YoungBoy continued expanding the conversation by mentioning other names, including Doughboy, Offset, and figures connected to Atlanta's entertainment scene. The situation kept growing as more people became part of the discussion. It felt like YoungBoy was moving without hesitation, sending messages in multiple directions, and using music as the main way to express himself. After spending long periods dealing with restrictions and public pressure, his return to the spotlight came with a lot of energy and a lot for people to analyze. Then came the moment that changed the entire conversation. An unreleased NBA YoungBoy song snippet started spreading across social media on July 14th, and one particular line immediately caught the attention of the entire hip-hop world. The lyric was, "Had thought about Gilly, but that ain't kill nothing about his son." That line hit people differently because it was not aimed at Gilly only as an entertainer, rapper, or public figure. It brought up one of the most painful moments of his life by referencing the death of his son, Devin Spady, better known as YNG Cheese. Many listeners viewed the lyric as crossing into deeply personal territory because it connected a music disagreement with a real family tragedy. No Jumper reposted the clip on July 14th, and within a short time, the snippet spread across social media platforms. The reaction was immediate. Fans, artists, and commentators began debating the meaning behind the line and questioning why such a personal subject was brought into a rap conflict. To understand why the response was so intense, it is important to understand who YNG was and why his loss affected so many people. Devin Spady was 25 years old and was working toward creating his own identity as an artist. Coming from Wyncote, Pennsylvania, he was following a path connected to the same culture his father helped represent. He released music projects, including Born a Star, and worked alongside his brother Mac as part of the duo Mac and Cheese. He was not simply known as Gilly's son. He was a young artist trying to build his own name, create his own sound, and develop his own future. He was also a father, with a young child at home, making the loss even more heartbreaking for those close to him. On the night of July 20th, 2023, tragedy struck in Philadelphia. A shooting happened near Masher Street and Nedrow Avenue in the Olney section of the city at around 8:24 p.m. Devin Spady was injured during the shooting and was taken to Einstein Medical Center by emergency responders. Despite efforts to save him, he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. 2 other people survived the incident. Investigators recovered evidence from the scene, including multiple shell casings, but at the time, there were no immediate arrests and no recovered weapon publicly connected to the case. The loss sent shockwaves through Philadelphia and the wider hip-hop community. People who knew Cheese, as well as those who respected Gilly's family, shared messages of support and grief. Meek Mill reacted publicly, speaking about how difficult it was to survive the violence affecting Philadelphia and expressing sadness over the situation. Wallow267, Gilly's cousin and longtime podcast partner, also shared an emotional tribute, showing his heartbreak while promising to stand beside Gilly through the pain. For many people watching this situation unfold, this was the reason the YoungBoy lyric created such a strong reaction. It was not viewed as a regular rap exchange. It involved a loss that had affected a family and a community for years. Lloyd Banks shared condolences. Swizz Beatz, Fat Joe, Mano, Beanie Siegel, and many others showed support as the community came together during a painful moment. The loss of YNG Cheese affected people far beyond one family because it represented a tragedy that so many communities have experienced. What made the situation even more powerful was the connection to the work Gilly and Wallow had already been doing through $1 million worth of game. The platform was built around conversations meant to guide young people, especially young black men in Philadelphia, away from the same dangers that took Cheese's life. They used their own experiences, mistakes, and lessons to try to create something positive. They shared stories about survival, growth, and making better choices. Then, despite all those efforts, violence reached their own family and took someone they loved most. That reality made the loss feel even heavier. Months after Cheese's passing, Gilly opened up about the pain during an appearance on the Pivot podcast. He shared one of the most emotional moments of the entire experience, having to wash his son's body. Gilly explained that it was the hardest moment he had ever faced, but he also described it as a moment that changed him forever. He said he believed he was already a man before that day because he handled responsibilities, provided for his family, supported his sisters, cared for his parents, and helped raise children who were not even his own. But that moment forced him to experience a level of pain and responsibility that completely transformed his perspective. It was a rare kind of honesty that showed people why Gilly's words carry so much meaning in hip-hop. He was not simply talking about grief from a distance. He was sharing a real experience while millions of people watch, allowing others dealing with similar losses to see someone openly carrying that pain. In the years after Cheese's death, Gilly continued finding ways to honor his son's memory. He kept speaking about him, celebrating his life through his platform, supporting community efforts, and continuing events like Gilly Fest. Meek Mill, who was one of the first artists to publicly show support after the shooting, showed that support again in a major way. In the summer of 2025, he gifted Gilly a custom iced-out pendant featuring an image of YNG Cheese, creating an emotional moment that quickly spread online. The video showed Gilly becoming emotional, embracing Meek, and expressing his appreciation. He later shared the moment with the caption, "Love and appreciate you, my brother. Miss you, kiddo. Long live Cheese." For many people, that moment showed the real bond behind the scenes of hip-hop. Cheese was not just a headline, or a name connected to a controversy. He was a son, a father, an artist, and a person whose memory continued to matter to everyone close to him. That is why the reaction to the NBA YoungBoy snippet became so intense. To many people, this was not just another rap moment or another disagreement. It involved a loss that was still deeply felt, and the culture responded immediately. Even people who normally stay away from rap conflicts found themselves speaking on this situation. The reason was simple. Many viewed the mention of cheese as a boundary that should not be crossed. In hip-hop, competition and criticism have always been part of the culture, but many believe there is a difference between attacking an artist and bringing someone's child or family tragedy into the conversation. That belief is not about making rap less intense. Hip-hop has always been built on honesty, emotion, and confrontation. But grief is something every person can understand, regardless of status or background. Turning someone's deepest loss into a weapon is something many people see as crossing into a different category entirely. The reaction online reflected that feeling. Multiple hip-hop platforms discussed how unusual the moment was, especially because Gilly had not been heavily involved in YoungBoy's previous diss activity. That made many people question why he became a target in the first place. Hot New Hip Hop described the lyric as an extremely controversial moment, and pointed out that bringing the deceased into a conflict is often viewed as a boundary many artists avoid. Across social media, even some listeners who had enjoyed YoungBoy's aggressive approach in previous exchanges admitted that this situation felt different. For many fans, this was not just another punchline or another diss record. It became a conversation about respect, loss, and where people believe the limits of competition should be. Now, Gilly's response is where things became even more interesting. The way he handled the situation revealed a lot about his mindset. On July 15th, the day after the snippet began circulating, Gilly went live and addressed the situation. Instead of creating a bigger online battle, making threats, or turning the moment into a performance, he stayed controlled. He played lyrics from Lil Durk's Ah, Aha, a song that carried its own meaning connected to loyalty, loss, and street experiences. Then Gilly spoke directly. He explained that he was an old school man and that people from his generation do not always announce their next move online. He said, "I don't take it no type of way. You can't make me feel no type of way mentioning my son." Gilly made it clear that he had already faced the reality of his loss, and that he was not allowing someone else's words to control his emotions. He also stated that he did not feel threatened by the situation. Then he added a detail that caught many people's attention. Gilly pointed out that his youngest child is older than NBA YoungBoy himself. That statement carried more meaning than just an age comparison. It highlighted a difference in life experience and perspective. Gilly was speaking as someone who had already lived through decades of responsibility, family struggles, and unimaginable loss. To many viewers, the contrast was not only about generations. It was about how two people at different stages of life could look at the same situation in completely different ways. His exact words, "We don't say what we're gonna do on the internet," quickly became one of the most repeated moments from the entire situation. The clip was shared by My Mixtapes and spread across social media almost as quickly as the original YoungBoy snippet. The contrast between the two moments stood out to a lot of people. YoungBoy's approach was loud, direct, and aggressive through music. Gilly's response was much more controlled, calm, and calculated. Instead of matching the same energy, he chose to speak from his own perspective and let his actions speak louder than a heated reaction. In hip-hop, many people believe that experience changes how someone handles conflict. Those who have already been through serious situations often understand that every response does not need to happen publicly. Sometimes saying less can create an even bigger impact. But the biggest question still remains: why did NBA YoungBoy target Gilly in the first place? Going into this situation, there was no widely known public conflict between the two. There was no long-running back and forth, no major exchange of insults, and no obvious moment that explained why Gilly became part of the conversation. The Wyoming interview from 2023 was known by fans, and there had been some discussion from people connected to YoungBoy about whether the interview was approved. However, nothing publicly showed that the situation had developed into a major personal issue. Several media outlets, including All Hip Hop and Hot New Hip Hop, pointed out that the exact reason behind the tension remained unclear. At the same time, YoungBoy was already in a period where he was addressing multiple names, situations, and topics through his music. He had gone after Future, spoken on Atlanta, and mentioned different figures across the culture. It appeared like he was addressing anyone he felt connected to the conversation, and Gilly became one of the names caught in that wave. Some fans believe the 2023 interview controversy involving Herm the Black Sheep may have played a role. Others think previous discussions or opinions around YoungBoy from the podcast world may have bothered him, but without direct confirmation, those theories remain speculation. The clearest explanation, based on what is publicly known, is that YoungBoy was in an extremely active sensitive and confrontational creative period, and Gilly became part of the situation during that time. The bigger conversation became less about one lyric and more about where YoungBoy was mentally and creatively during this chapter. After spending significant time dealing with legal restrictions and being away from normal life, he returned with a lot of energy and a willingness to address anyone he felt needed a response. His legal journey had been complicated, including federal gun-related charges, a plea agreement, issues connected to prescription medication fraud allegations, time already served, and a reduced sentence. With his scheduled release date set for July 27, 2026, many people were watching closely to see what direction he would take next. Instead, his return period became filled with controversy, reactions, and debates about his choices. The Gilly situation became one of the biggest examples of how quickly a single lyric could turn into a much larger cultural conversation. With freedom reportedly less than 2 weeks away, the situation created even more discussion around the choices being made during that period. Many people questioned why someone preparing for a major life change would use that moment to bring up such a painful subject involving another person's family. The bigger issue became a much larger conversation about one of hip-hop's oldest debates: where exactly is the line in rap beef? The genre has always been built around competition, confidence, and artists challenging each other. But even with that history, many fans believe there are certain boundaries that should remain respected. Hip-hop has always allowed artists to be direct and aggressive, but some topics have traditionally been viewed as different. Bringing someone's children into a conflict or using the death of a loved one as a weapon is something many people consider beyond normal competition. When artists cross those boundaries, the reaction often follows them long after the moment passes. Rap history has seen similar debates before. Jay-Z's reference to Nas's daughter in Takeover is still discussed years later. Pusha T revealing Drake's son on The Story of Adidon created one of the biggest conversations in modern rap. Each situation created arguments about whether an artist was making a strategic move or crossing a personal line. The debate never completely disappears, because every generation of hip-hop eventually faces the same question: when does competition turn into something more personal? What makes the YoungBoy situation especially complicated for many listeners is that he is also a father. Throughout his music, YoungBoy has spoken about his children, his fears, and the pressure of trying to be there for them while dealing with legal issues and personal challenges. That is why some fans found the situation difficult to understand. They pointed out the contrast between the emotional honesty found in many of his songs and the decision to reference another person's loss in a conflict. YoungBoy's catalog includes many records where he expresses pain, vulnerability, and the struggles of his own life. That contrast is what made the reaction so strong. Some listeners struggled to connect the artist, who openly discusses family and emotions, with the artist involved in this controversy. The situation also brought comparisons to other moments in rap history, but many people felt there was an important difference here. In this case, Gilly's son was not a distant topic or a hidden part of someone's personal life. Cheese was a real person whose death deeply affected his family, friends, and the Philadelphia community. Gilly had publicly spoken about the pain of losing his son, including emotional conversations about the final moments he experienced after the tragedy. Because of that, many people viewed the reference as especially sensitive and difficult to defend. For critics of the lyric, the issue was not about whether artists can compete or exchange harsh words. It was about whether some pain should be left outside of the battle entirely. Many believed the mention of cheese moved the conversation away from rap competition and into a much more serious space. The speed of the reaction showed how much social media has changed hip-hop conflicts. A short, unreleased snippet appeared online on July 14th, and within hours, fans, media outlets, and artists were already debating what it meant and where the situation would go next. Within just a few hours, the entire situation was everywhere. By July 15th, Gilly had already responded, and his reaction spread across social media almost as quickly as the original snippet. The full cycle moved at a speed that has become normal in the modern era. A diss appears, the public reacts, the response arrives, and the entire culture begins debating what it all means. The entire situation, the lyric, the backlash, Gilly's response, and the larger conversation about respect unfolded in less than 48 hours. That speed changes everything. There is barely any time for private conversations, explanations, or people to process what happened before millions of opinions have already formed. In today's social media-driven world, the conversation often happens first, and the consequences come afterward. This situation also carried extra weight because of who Gillie The Kid has become over time. He is no longer viewed only as a rapper, rapper. He is a father who experienced the loss of his child. He is a community figure who has used his platform to speak about choices, responsibility, and the same issues connected to the violence that took his son. He is someone who sat in front of cameras and openly discussed one of the most painful moments of his life, washing his son's body after his death. That level of honesty gave many people a different understanding of what grief can look like. Because of that history, many listeners viewed the lyric differently than a normal rap attack. To them, it was not simply a competitive bar or a piece of battle rap. It became a conversation about how people handle another person's pain and what responsibility comes with having a massive audience. At the same time, the situation shows how complicated hip-hop conflicts can become. This is not just a simple story about two artists exchanging words. It involves grief that does not disappear, personal experiences that shape how people react, and the pressure that comes with having a platform watched by millions. It also raises questions about what happens when someone has carried years of frustration, restrictions, and personal struggles. How does that energy come out when they finally have a place to express it? Music has always been an outlet for pain, anger, and survival, but audiences continue debating where expression becomes something more damaging. The situation also highlights the ongoing conversation inside hip-hop. Should artists have complete freedom to say anything in a song, or does having a huge platform come with certain responsibilities? For many people, Gilly's response represented a different type of strength. Instead of escalating the situation publicly, he spoke from the perspective of someone who has already experienced a level of loss that changed his life forever. His message was that he did not need to prove himself through threats or online reactions. Now, the biggest question surrounding the situation is what happens next. NBA YoungBoy was approaching his expected release date on July 27, 2026, and many fans were waiting to see what his next chapter would look like. His return was expected to be a major moment for hip-hop, but instead of only celebrating his comeback, the culture was also watching how he would handle the reaction from one of the most talked about controversies surrounding him. Instead, as NBA YoungBoy's release approached, the conversation around him became focused less on a comeback celebration and more on the questions surrounding the controversy. Instead of only talking about new music, fans were debating the impact of his words and what the next chapter would look like after such a heavily discussed moment. Hip-hop has a long memory, trends move quickly, but moments that connect with real emotions often stay with people for years. In this situation, Gilly's response stood out because he did not allow the situation to pull him into a cycle of endless back and forth. He did not chase attention. He did not continue the situation with a series of online reactions, threats, or constant responses. He made his point clear. He said he was an old-school man who does not announce his moves on the internet. He explained that no lyric could take away the pain he had already survived, and after that, he stepped away. That kind of restraint sent its own message. For many people watching, Gilly's reaction showed the mindset of someone who has already faced one of life's hardest moments. Losing a child is a type of pain that changes a person forever. After experiencing something like that, many believe there are certain things that simply cannot hurt in the same way. The version of Gilly that fans have seen over the last few years is someone who took unimaginable grief and tried to turn it into something meaningful. Through his platform, his community work, and the way he continues honoring Cheese's memory, he has shown another side of himself beyond music, and that is why this situation became bigger than a normal rap disagreement. One lyric ended up bringing attention back to YNG Cheese, his story, and the impact his life had on the people around him. It reminded fans of Gilly's emotional conversation on the Pivot podcast, where he discussed the hardest moments after losing his son. It brought attention back to the support from artists like Meek Mill and the public moments where Cheese's memory was honored. It also caused people to revisit the Wyoming $1 million worth of game interview, the discussions that followed it, and the complicated relationship between public conversations, artist camps, and personal feelings. At the same time, the controversy forced another conversation about NBA YoungBoy's path, a moment that many expected to be focused on his return, his music, and his future, instead became connected to a debate about choices, consequences, and the reaction that followed his words. And perhaps the most talked about part of the entire situation was not another diss track or another viral argument. It was Gilly's decision to stay controlled. He did not need a long response. He did not need to create more chaos. Instead, he responded in a way that many people felt matched his life experience. He played a few Lil Durk lyrics, shared his thoughts, and reminded people that not every move needs to be announced publicly, because sometimes silence can say more than 1,000 words. Hip-hop has always celebrated the loud moments, the unforgettable bars, and the biggest reactions. But sometimes the moments that last the longest are the ones where someone chooses discipline over emotion. Gillie The Kid spent the last 2 years showing that grief does not have to be the end of someone's story. He used his pain as motivation, continued building his legacy, and kept his son's memory alive in a way that mattered to his family and his community. He did not allow a single lyric to define Cheese's story. He did not allow a controversy to erase everything his son meant to him. Instead, he showed why so many people respected the way he handled the situation, and that composure became the loudest statement of all. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think NBA YoungBoy crossed a line that should never be crossed, or do you believe this was simply another chapter of rap competition and artists expressing themselves? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who wants to stay updated on the biggest stories happening in hip-hop. Drop your opinion, join the conversation, and stay locked in, because there are always more stories, debates, and moments shaping the culture.